E-commerce space, Amazon space, definitely the inventory is the aspect of the business that requires 90% of the revenue is through Amazon. Part of the opportunity is back then, a lot of people didn't really know what selling on Amazon was. Is that a real business? Matter of fact, like investors, like private equity and the guys that would buy other businesses, I would even tell them about this business and they did not care. It didn't matter how successful it was, 10 million, 20 million. They were like, no, we don't,
There's a difference between a dream chaser and a dream catcher.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Dreamcatchers podcast. I'm your host, Jerome, and we stayed on the East Coast for this episode, ladies and gentlemen. We're down in this good old Peach State, and I don't know if Jamie's actually in Atlanta, but he's in the Atlanta area, and we've got Jamie Davidson on with us today, and I'll tell you what, you guys better listen up. He's built a massive business, been able to exit at a really high level, and has just done a ton of good along the way. So Jamie, with that, welcome in, man. Thanks for sharing a few moments with us today.
Yeah, thanks, Jerome. It's great to be here, and it was great meeting you just recently as well.
Yeah, that was pretty cool to catch up with you at the Driven Mastermind. I know you're a faculty member there, and I was sitting beside Jamie, and he's just casual conversation, and I was like, "Who is this guy?" And so now I invited him on the podcast after I hear that he had an exit, and then I go do the research, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this guy's like a rock star, superstar, and he's really humble about it, though, which I appreciate in a lot of levels. But we're going to dig in so folks can really get an understanding of what it takes to be successful. And so I want to start out by thanking you for your service. My father was in the military as an enlisted man. He was in the Marines first, then went into the Army. And I think it's always great to acknowledge soldiers when they've done duty for us. So I just want to thank you for your service to our country, first off.
I appreciate that, Jerome. Definitely appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. So one of my best friends in the world went to West Point. Jamie, you went to West Point. And then I feel like you were studying something super technical and went out into corporate America. And then you did the first exit of an entrepreneur that we identify, which is leaving corporate America behind and starting your own thing. But I don't want to just kind of skip over all the steps. Like, tell us about that journey through corporate, because it wasn't like you were doing $30,000 or $40,000 a year by the time you left corporate America behind.
Yeah, appreciate the question there is, yeah, I mean, essentially, for, I think a lot of the journey for people, at least my experience was, I knew entrepreneurship was interesting, but primarily growing up, and whether it was going to West Point or just really through high school into college, which was like, hey, get a good education and then, translate that into a good job. Even though I kind of have a family history in the military and I, was interested in serving, I always kind of had my eye on a career, for, your life, as most people do. And so kind of my mindset then was more about, get this good education at West Point. And I had this leadership experience in the military, and then translate that into, good corporate experience and jobs. And so, that's kind of what I did, which was, there's pros and cons of it. I mean, there's plenty of pros to it, but, there's some trade-offs. So yeah, I was just kind of climbing that corporate ladder, and I won't go through every detail of my corporate career, but, essentially I'd eventually risen up to become a senior vice president in this company. I was in banking. I worked in the for-profit education space and got pretty senior there. And then some private equity guys came to me, some investment bankers, private equity came to me and said, you could be a good candidate to run some companies, kind of small to mid-sized companies that these investors buy. And so that kind of bridged me a little bit the eye towards entrepreneurship. It's not what totally put me over it, because I still was a employee, even as a CEO of a company or a COO. But I still wasn't, an entrepreneur until later in my career.
So that transition, though, from like a senior vice president to C-suite, did you have to become a new person? Like, was there a switch that flipped, or was there did you get a peek behind the veil and understand some things that you didn't get when you were in some of the lower roles?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, one way I feel like I became through my career, I was becoming kind of a bigger fish in smaller ponds, because I was, military, of course, massive. And I was with a big, $30 billion bank, and then business. And so I was getting more senior roles and kind of like when I was in the Halfland was a couple hundred million, maybe a $500 million business. And then the private equity was like a $50 million business I was in charge of. But to your point, it's interesting. On one hand, because of those big companies, I felt like I was prepared. Like if you're running a big division, in some cases, as the CEO or the COO, originally the chief operating officer, the companies were smaller. The division was smaller, but the responsibility was bigger because you're the guy in charge. But it is a funny question you bring it up because you think prepared, but in retrospect, you kind of screw it up. You are kind of winging it. I think you kind of think how to go about it, but like in retrospect, I think it's like anything in life, you got to experience it. So I didn't have a ton of experience in those roles until I got into them. And you kind of live and learn, and you try to do things well that are your strengths, but then there's just some things from inexperience you have to go through enough times to get it right.
Time in the seat is what I call it.
Yeah. So it's and that's kind of the way it works. It's like anything, as we talk about the entrepreneurial stuff, until you're in it. Everyone's in it for the first time at some point. And so, it's just the way it goes in those roles. And, the stakes are higher because, when you're in those cases where you have like a board of directors and, they're counting on you and, your leadership to make the investment work, those are, there's a lot of pressure and intensity, which later on helps, as you go into running your own business and things. So, I could draw upon my experience through that corporate journey.
Did you despise or dislike corporate? Is that why you made the shift, or did you just see opportunity to make more money? Like what kind of drove you moving into what most people would consider riskier?
Yeah. And that's the way I viewed it too, is because, so I was up in the Northeast. I'm from New York originally, and I had moved to Atlanta for one of these deals, for one of these private equity deals. And I was a chief operating officer, and my next door neighbor, Jason's native Chinese here in the Atlanta area. And, he was selling basically cell phone cases out of his garage. And he was also an IT consultant. So he had a full-time gig that I think for working for Microsoft tools or stuff like that. So, so he was actually the one. It's funny. He'd been in the US a long time, but we kind of became friends, and I would teach him how to make a proper drink over there. We'd kind of hang out, but he was getting more and more into the entrepreneurship side. So he was kind of trying to convince me of it. And, kind of the point of your question, it was harder for me to do it because married, three boys, making good money, and a lot of that stuff's taken care of. So the idea of being an entrepreneur was like very attractive to me and exciting. And you kind of always think about it over the years, like, hey, I want to do this myself, or I don't want to make money for other people. But the reality of it is, exactly said, it's risky, and it's different, of course, when you're married with kids and you have obligations and house bills and everything else that in a standard of living that they're used to, that it's hard to, say, hey, we're going to go do this thing and hopefully it'll work out. But if it doesn't, it doesn't.
So was your wife working outside the home?
No, she worked early before we had our second kid, but yeah, so she's stay at home as well.
So for you, it was all or nothing, right? It had to work. Or like when you were thinking about making this transition, it's like, this has to work, right?
Yeah. And I had a chance to see I had some track record to see, because the business had started a little bit next door with the cell phone cases. So I could see the potential of it. So it was easier to, wasn't guaranteed, but it wasn't like we weren't starting with just an idea. There was a little bit of runway before I made the switch. Yeah.
So much better than me. I walked out and I didn't have any clients. I didn't have any profit.
Oh, really?
I didn't have anything. Yeah, I went to zero, and I was at zero for a year or maybe a little bit more.
Oh, wow.
While I was trying to figure out stuff. But
Yeah.
so you started, Did you guys go into partnership right off the bat, or did like you start your own thing and then you figured it out and you combine? Like, how did that work?
Yeah, yeah. So it's more the latter. So initially, there's him. There's another. Eventually became another partner, uh, guy Brad, also in Atlanta. He worked for Coca-Cola, again, also native Chinese, and then I was still continuing my work initially here, but I was helping in terms of kind of some of the strategy and some of the things they weren't as good at initially here to get things going. And then about a year later, then I came in ready to jump in full time in terms of quitting the job and knowing that we could build this to be something big.
So in that first year or in the first few months, did you have an income drop?
Yes, I did have an income drop, definitely. Income drop, yeah, for the first several years. Yeah.
How did everybody handle that? Or did you just supplement with savings? Like, how'd you navigate? Because the golden handcuffs is the reason why people don't do it.
Yeah, yeah. So a couple of things. One is it was reasonable. Like we had a confident, like even whether like the private equity deals that I was doing running the companies, it's like, hey, you X base pay, you have X amount of potential bonus, and then there's equity or stock options that eventually pay off. So I've had some of that experience as well too with companies exiting, and so even though I was a smaller portion of those, so I had some ability with that, some cash around that. And then, yeah, it's kind of like the deal is like, you need some basic amount to, that you need. But one of the approaches that we had running the business, because we saw the growth potential and we were experiencing it, which was that we called it kind of a crime against ourselves to pull money out, for anything that we didn't have to, because we knew that money was so valuable in the business as much as possible. So, every situation is not like that, but when you have that situation where it's worthwhile, we try to push as much into the business as we could, and we tried not to take it out, even when we could have earlier. But if we didn't need to, we didn't.
So you're truly not take. Did you have a salary, or you guys just didn't take anything out and you're just living?
We did have a salary initially here. At some point later on, we even took it down lower, and then could take distributions and so forth when we needed it. Yeah.
I think people are kind of getting uncomfortable in their seat because it's like, wait, it's going the wrong way. But
Yeah.
there's a upside to that, right? So you push the
Yeah.
money back in and it
Yeah, because
grows.
when you're actually, running the business, I mean, you can control it. So some of it could be tax mitigation, some of it can be, uh, where the business is. So it's not like we can't access the funds if we wanted to. But it's also like, so let's say, we each put in, if you and I both put in $500,000 to start a business tomorrow, so it's $1 million we put in, and then we both start taking a $200,000 salary out of that. Well, we just put money in, with no tax advantage, and then we're just basically pulling back out, 60% of our money, or whatever the tax rate is, the 40% rate. So we don't really want to do that, right? Because that money, it defeats the purpose a little bit of putting that in. So it's a little bit of that dynamic. And so yeah, you've got it. That's the tricky part about starting businesses, and why, a lot of people, it's hard for a lot of people to do it, because there is that they get. But once, like, just from a numbers financial standpoint, it doesn't take a lot of money because of the taxes, is to pull the money back out that, is essentially your money that you've put in there.
I got it. I got it. And so did you have to buy in since they'd already started, or were you able
Uh,
just to use strategy to be a part?
no, I had to buy in. I had to invest in to it. Definitely. Yeah.
And then you guys used that to buy more product, and that was the value, basically, right? You wanted to be able to buy more product so you could sell more or put more into marketing.
Yeah, essentially, I mean, in the e-commerce space, Amazon space, definitely the inventory is the aspect of the business that is cash intensive, and that you have to have. There's certainly funds around marketing, like any business, but really the inventory is the big one you got to solve for, and have. And part of it, the timing back then was easier too, because our margins were really good, that we could self-fund our operation. We didn't have to get really creative. We could reinvest our profits back into the business quickly. But as far as just investing in the business too, there was a definite approach of like, hey, we all need to have enough skin in the game, that we're all financially invested into this to be aligned as partners as well too. So that was a part of it there. But then, yeah, the business wise, inventory was the biggest cash need of the business.
Got it. And so this is the red pill moment, I call it. So the day you decided that you were going to leave and go full time in the new business, like what was it? What was the catalyst? Or had you just picked a date at random and said, I'm out on this day? Like, give me that.
Yeah. So we had, like, Jason, the partner, we had talked about it a bunch. Like, he had tried to convince me a bunch, and he's like, you got to do it. This is so, it's so liberating. It's so great. And just back that we said earlier, it was just hard to pull that trigger till, I had enough confidence that even though it wasn't gonna be as much money, that that it made sense to do it still. So, we'd kind of mapped it out a little bit. Jason and I, and it wasn't overly complex. We didn't have like a bunch of crazy attorneys and plan, but it was kind of like back of the envelope of what it would look like, and what it would require me to buy in with the business. And then, from there, it was probably about 6 months from the initial discussion till I actually made the decision to do it. I saw the potential with it. The current one, part of the challenge with the deals I was doing was that they would require me to probably move a lot. The investors always wanted me to move wherever the deal was. And so, like, it was Atlanta. One deal was in Chicago. One was gonna be in Boston. It was like, I don't want to like move my family all the time. It was hard. I couldn't really control that. Probably now you can do it better because, like Kobe said, but the geography wise, there was a ton of pressure to move places that I didn't want to move to. And so honestly, that was a big one that, hey, even if initially it's not as much money, we can control. Like, I can build that here in Atlanta. And then just like him, neither of us really knew how much upside there would be with the business. But and there was just excitement for it. So yeah, no, there was that calculation, but part of it was because I knew the next deal I'd have to move somewhere. And I thought, hey, let's do this. And worst case, I knew if the business didn't work out, I could still do it. I'd probably go back out to these private equity firms they're hiring, and be a hired gun. But it just, after doing that for enough time, it just wasn't what I wanted to do long term.
Gets old quick. Okay, so were there specific things that, like you said, 6 months out, you were getting ready to, you like, I want to do this. Was there any like strategic things you did in order to prepare so that you would have a softer landing outside of starting to like invest in the business?
I mean, it's an interesting question, because I really, it wasn't like overly strategic with it or about it. I mean, essentially just figuring out that, hey, I have enough capital and cash that we can, that it won't negatively impact our lifestyle. And then from there, it was more like, I felt confident that I trusted and liked, the partners I was going to be with, that I wanted to go into business with them. And so, then there was just enthusiasm and excitement to do it. So, if I was doing it completely by myself, I probably would have taken longer. Probably would have had to build by myself on the side more. And then, eventually made that decision, and maybe I would not have done it. But in the sense that I had, like, potential partners, and there was planning, and the business was already, growing. So it wasn't from zero. That made it that, I just knew I had enough capital, and I was excited to make the change.
Ladies and gentlemen, you heard it. Don't start at zero. All the money going the wrong way. It's not the best way to do it. So you guys build this thing up. Like, how big do you get it before you sell the first piece or the whole first thing? I don't know how it's sold.
Yeah. So, the business kind of went in stages. So, compared to most, and most people can Amazon business, or it's an e-com business, of which 90% of the revenue is through Amazon. And part of the opportunity is, back then, a lot of people didn't really know, what selling on Amazon was. Is that a real business? Matter of fact, like investors, like private equity and the guys that would buy other businesses, I would even tell them about this business, and they would they did not care. It didn't matter how successful it was, 10 million, 20 million. They were like, no, we don't know. They didn't even say, they just kind of nodded their head. Like, that sounds interesting and weird, but that's not something that they know, because, investors, they invest in things that they know and they've seen, and there's a track record. And this stuff was just like foreign. Years later, the last couple of years, that's changed. And now people, there's a lot of investors in the space, but back then there was not. So, as far as the journey, so the business grew really fast early on. So it got to like $5 million pretty quick, within a year. Within 3 years, it got close to 20 million. We did an acquisition of a company. We did an acquisition of another brand, which was about 5 million. So we added them. And then both those brands eventually grew to, and I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but like both those brands became about 40 million eventually each. So that's why the business became so big. So the business got to like about 60 million. And we're talking like 2015-ish, and it kind of plateaued there for a few years. So it was, good sales. The margins were tighter, like different years, like anywhere between 15% down to, I think about 6% one year. But so anyway, we could talk more about that. But essentially, to your question, my partner Jason then moved him and his wife and their daughter over to China, where we had a small team. And we actually kind of rebuilt the entire team over in China with about 200 employees, and kept the team in Atlanta smaller with the warehouse. And that's how we scaled the brand. Then we had a kind of an engine in place to scale the business to over 100 million in 2018.
Wait, I just want to make sure I heard you right. You acquired a company that was doing similar revenue as you, and then you grew two companies. What was that? Like 8x from 5 to 40?
Yeah, those, and we pretty much stayed in those same, eventually we sold other categories, but yeah, those two brands, they became two of the biggest brands in the Amazon space and in the cell phone space. And on Amazon, the two most competitive categories are cell phone accessories and supplements for different reasons. But the reason why the cell phone accessories, and actually I say cell phone accessories, initially the big product back then we sold to was the iPad was really big. So everyone bought these iPads that were expensive, and everyone needed a case for their iPod, and every school needed a case. So we were really big in the iPad case initially, and then the iPhone became, really prevalent as well too. And so those things do really well for e-commerce because they're light, fairly small, and they're kind of expensive for what they are. So, and they're cheap. They're not that expensive to manufacture. So the math, it's one of those really good products early on. It's nowadays is much, way more competitive than back then. But yeah, so there was like a lot of money to be made for us and for other competitors in the space that were focused on it early on.
So what was the secret in growth? Because I mean, that's like hockey stick growth, right?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. It's funny, I did a podcast, say, with one of my business partners now, and we were talking about Amazon tools and softwares. And she was like, what was it like back then when you had no tools and software within the Amazon space? Which was true, because the industry, the seller community on Amazon really didn't exist. There was no third-party tools. But one of the keys, that being said, one of the keys to us being successful at the way we did was the partner Jason, in that I mentioned before, he had a background in IT, and the ability to set up a lot of systems and structures that were just custom made, not within the Amazon platform, but just, so if you think about like a logistical platform and the reporting and all like the stuff that we kind of already had at big companies that, we didn't have to build from scratch. That did help us a lot, that he was good at that, because we were able to build like our logistics system, having that in place. Like very few typical sellers, had that in place. So we were pretty sophisticated in terms of how we did it. There was also, like, on the selling strategy world, I've talked about this before a little bit, but everything was much more, they call, black hat and white hat. So the black hat stuff was super hardcore. We didn't really even talk about it that way. It was more just like, because Amazon was so far behind, it was just the way the amount of innovation or ways people came up to make the algorithm work. It was like, now it's like so against the rules. But we did a lot of like crazy stuff. Like we'd have 50 computers buying our product when we launch it, and automated on VPN, and creating orders, like basically dummy fake orders. So you had all of this kind of gaming of the system at a high level going on. And frankly, so did our top competitors were doing it too. And so it was a bit of like an IT computer game, as opposed to now it's like brand building. But back then it was not at all.
Wow. And so I guess the goal was to get on the first page because it's really just search and then buy, right? I mean, if it's SEO on
Exactly.
steroids.
Yeah. And so now, I mean, over time, it's become much more, build a brand and build a community and build, like, none of that was really the game there. It was more like just get people to buy, get your product to rank on page one. The one thing that hasn't changed is that you got to have a good product. So that part does not change. So we recognized that earlier, that, we kind of viewed ourselves as a product development firm in the space. And then we did all of our kind of magic in terms of ranking the product and everything else. But we put a lot of emphasis on getting the product really good and getting it differentiated, because all the other stuff wouldn't have mattered. If the product sucked, then then it would have been very short term.
The reviews would kill you.
Yeah, it would catch up
So
with you. It's just in any company, any business. So yeah, it was a good combination of that, the market opportunity, and our know-how, how to rank things, and then also some, systems and structure that we could actually scale and, build things at a scale that, a lot of people maybe wouldn't be set up to do as quickly as we did.
now M&A is one of my favorite things. You talked about buying the company. How'd you even know to buy a competitor? Or I mean, and a competitor of similar size. It's not like you were just going in and picking up like $1 million company. Like you were like, you guys are big as we are. Like, come on.
Yeah, so we were a little, actually, I probably, so we were a little bigger. I think they were at 5 million and we were at like coming up on 15 million at the time or something like that. So we were ahead of them, but it was a little dynamic because of the Chinese relationship for, again, all native Chinese, but in the US, but with the community within the Atlanta area amongst the Chinese, they knew each other a lot and communicate. So it was another, Chinese native in the close by. Actually, we're all in the same gated neighborhood, actually. And that was doing the same thing. He was out there selling these things, and he's a young guy, he's early 20s. And I mean, people that understood, this opportunity out there, they're not out there talking about it to people. So people didn't know what was going on, but it was, it was kind of like, if you knew, you knew. And so, yeah, he was doing really well. He's just really young. And he wasn't sure how much. It was almost like too much success too quickly. How much more he really wanted to do of this. He almost got bored with it. And so he was up for us kind of acquiring the brand, and it was good. It became like bigger than our main brand eventually. And so, yeah, it was just the opportunity, and the numbers worked. So we could, the margins were good. And so we could basically acquire that brand.
But did he just say, "Hey, I want out and I know you guys are in this space"? Like, how does the deal like that come
Yeah,
about,
so
I
the
guess?
deal was it was kind of came in two parts. One is, first he came aboard as a partner as well.
Okay.
And he ended up leaving and being out of the deal. Um, I don't know, about maybe 18 months after the deal. So part of it was, initially we brought him in to it, and then eventually so he was part of the part of the upside of the entire company. But then eventually he got bought out.
Got it. Got it. Okay. So you guys go off, you're doing your thing, you're growing them, and then do you decide, hey, it's time to get out and cash out, or did somebody approach you and say they want to buy?
Yeah, so it was interesting because a couple things were interesting, because right now I do work in the investment banking space. I do with a company, Northbound Group, to help Amazon brands exit and do this type of stuff. And so it's a little cleaner now, because hey, look at the financials, you make sure that there's no like black hat activity that's really gone on, or if there has, it needs to be discussed and worked out. So this business here, we had like grown it. We didn't talk a lot about the details of the journey of the kind of the operations, but like basically we had this battle with Amazon where the business would get shut down at times for like,
Oh
I don't know,
man.
30 days at a time. Like, so one time right after Thanksgiving, it got shut down all the way to Christmas, which is like
Prime
30% of the
season.
sales. Yeah. It's like 30, at least now sometimes it's 40% of the entire year sales. And so it was a bit of the cost of doing business. So they would like whack you and then you get back, because there was so much money at stake amongst the competitors in the space that it was like, and years later, Amazon would get, more sophisticated and they could like shut you down no matter how big you were. Um, but that being said, the point of me saying that is it made it a little bit messier in terms of looking at the opportunity. So there was an aspect because the business wasn't that clean in terms of, because of all kind of the different ways you had to do to make things work. So that was a little bit tricky because it's not as, every business can be messy in different ways, but it was tricky because, when someone's buying your business, they're going to pay a multiple, et cetera, is they're looking at their runway and whether, of course, that they can replicate and grow those things. And so if there's, if you're doing something crazy to get your results, it's not illegal, but not approved by the Amazon platform. It's trickier, to make that work. So over time, you had to clean that up. We had to launch other brands, other categories, which we did. So we got into like fitness and pet supplies. We waited a long time before we did that, but we started building out new brands and then running them kind of more brand focused ways so that the business could be more, more exitable, I guess is the word. So yeah, but to that point, there are different, you never know who might be interested in your business. So it could be strategic buyers, like for us, like companies like Made in China. You think of like an Alibaba, like there's interesting people in the space that just may be interested in there. There's certainly other bigger competitors in the space that would be interested. And then there's just kind of traditional investors like private equity that can be, that are looking to invest in it.
And so they approached you or you approached them? How did it get to the place where
Well,
you?
yeah. So there's two things. We had basically we leveraged an investment banking firm so for those that know, investment banking firm, I kind of view them as like your realtor to sell your home, but at a bigger scale. So brought them in. There was a lot of work done with like the entity structure, the auditing all the financials. So that was a pretty extensive process. We went through that almost for like 2 years in some ways to get kind of that part right. And then eventually an exit, where I got out of the business and different, depending on what they wanted to do, I got out and we had one of the main partners, he actually stayed in as part of the exit, but yeah, it was different for each of us.
So everybody had basically their own package on the
Yeah.
backside.
Yep. Yep.
That's crazy. And I mean, I guess the longer you stay in, the more potential upside you get or more shares you get in the new thing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. It's called that. Like if you want to get a second bite at the apple, they call it, and you want to, and depends what you think if, the person acquiring or, if that's interesting to you, then you could, you can do that and do it. But also just depends where you're at, where, what your interest level is, what you're looking to do and everything.
so did you actually get the check or did you get a wire?
Oh, I got a wire.
Yeah. When you opened the account, what was your reaction? Were you amazed? Were you like anticlimactic? Like,
Yeah, it wasn't, I guess, it wasn't like, it was good. I mean, it was good. It was, I guess exciting from that perspective. I had been part of, some exits, like I said, with the private equity side with exits. So I've, I have had some experience with it. So it wasn't like, you know, total shocking. And I also did have some perspective around, um, with the money. It wasn't from, I'd always, for a while had provided, from the corporate jobs done fairly well. So it was good. It was, it was exciting to do that. I was, you're proud of the moment, but yeah, it wasn't, it was more just planning on what the plan was next. And where we're going from there.
Was there anything that happened along the journey to exiting that you would have done differently? Like something that didn't go well?
It's a good question. I think a lot of it is, it's interesting, in terms of the people that you're interacting with, that, people play a big part. And so you've got to, one of the lessons, say partner Jason did at one point in the business, uh, before it got to 100 million, but it was like when it was kind of stagnant, 60 million, Jason was kind of bored with it. And
Hey guys, as you might know, a very small percentage of the people who actually listen to this podcast are subscribers. So do us a favor, subscribe. In fact, we did some analytics and we found out that only 25% of the people who listen are subscribers. And our goal is to get that to about 75% over the next 3 months. So do us a favor, hit the subscribe button so you get notified when our new episodes come. We plan to bring immense value to you guys going forward as we continue to improve the content that we create at Dream Capital. Your dreams should be real. Let's get back to the show.
was like, I don't want to be a cell phone guy for the rest of my life, and blah, blah, blah. And like, he had another idea. So he's like, Jamie, let's do I got this idea for this biotech company. I'm like, all right, well, I don't really know anything about biotech, but, so he's like, yeah, we've got this thing. It's this little, kind of like DNA, like a swab type thing. It's going to read DNA and tell you what food you shouldn't eat or not eat. And we're going to create this little kit. And so he's like, well, we're going to sell it. We're going to try to take this thing in China. We're going to raise a bunch of money. And we could take this public in China, like in a year. It's like, Jamie, it's totally different in China. You can go really fast. And so I was like, okay. So we actually was helping them on this investment too, and tying back to our main thing. But, Jason, I think he was driving that one, and he put in $1 million of his own money, and someone said they were going to give 9 million or something. So at $100 million valuation, and like within less than a month, he like lost $1 million. Like it freaking like lit it on fire, because he was kind of defrauded from, this Chinese investor. And of course, he felt stupid, upset. And then he was like, all right, from now on, then he became way more interested back in our little cell phone business again. And second of all was that, one of the mantras I still try to live by was like, and we talked a little about actually the driven mastermind. I didn't share at the point, but the end discussions around this a little bit, which is like, I try to just do business with people we like and people we trust. And if we do that, we said, hey, if we do that, the money will come, we'll be fine. So the point being there is, even when you're doing like investment transactions, you've just got to be careful what roads you go down, because there are plenty of people that will start down with an offer that's not really, their intention isn't really to, it's not really in good faith. Yeah. They're looking to make like a crazy concession. They want you to make crazy concessions as you get into it. So you've got to protect yourself up front, around the business. And so I'd say that's one. You just come across people that it's a waste of your time because they're not really serious. The other one,
is there a way that you can test that? Like, do you ask for hard money down or make them pay for your fees if they don't close a transaction or something?
Yeah. So part of it is, depending, that's why it's helpful to have like an investment banking firm or have someone representing you guys through it, because it doesn't have to be a big fancy firm. It could be just someone around it, one who has experience with the buyers, so they know a little bit, or they can help vet them for you. But there are things like, they go under, the deal goes under LOI, so letter of intent, that there's a period of time. But ideally, you'd like to have some track record of like, hey, when these guys go under LOI, they're like 90% of the time this deal is going to close, right? Versus if you're just doing some deal on your own, it's pretty risky. Like, oh, we've got this strategic buyer, or we got this guy who wants to invest in my business. A lot of times, it's a total crapshoot, what, if that will actually work out versus. So, like, again, it's like selling your home. Like, oh, if I could sell my home, by myself and save the commission. Yeah, you could, but you could also get screwed. You also might not get the best deal, so I personally recommend a professional to help you in some ways, to help navigate it and bring all the potential buyers to the table, so you can kind of, figure out the best deal, versus risking it if you're going kind of one-to-one.
use a professional. They usually get you more money than what they cost, if at least if they're worth their weight, right?
Yeah. I mean, you could do your homework on who you pick as that professional, but, um, I'd say worst case, you're probably going to do just as well financially, after their success fee. But there's odds are that, with the relationships and usually like, the thing about exiting your business, there's a lot of things that you need to do well before, like, a year or 2 years before running your business or before you want to sell it. That, again, if you understand those things and get some advice, it can make you a lot of money on your exit versus then if you're just showing up to the table, not realizing those things.
Got it. And you were getting ready to give me a second one that you would have done differently. Turned you the wrong way, turned you the other way.
Oh yeah. So I'm trying to think. So the one is around. The other one, I guess, is not something different. I guess it's more around the decision making of whether you want to stay in or not. But I guess it relates to that is the terms of the deal. You want to be really careful because a lot of times when you're negotiating the exit, the buyer is going to want to create an earnout, right? So the earnout for the deal, and as you know this stuff well, but is and so it's similar to that same point. You just need to understand, like, I almost treat that earnout almost expected value of 0 because you really don't have control of it. So a lot of people I see get excited, like, oh, I got, $4 million payouts, life changing, but I also have, $1.5 million or 2 million coming in the earnout. And it's like, well, no, you really don't. You might, but so many times I've seen that not pan out. And so you've got to be wary of that. And so it depends on what you're looking. You got the flip side, there could be something really exciting. Let's say you have a software company and you got someone else, if they take it from, they might 10x the value of your business in a few years, and you might regret that you didn't keep a part of it. But just understand your kind of risk dynamic there. And it's definitely risky to go on because I've just seen too many people. Yeah. When you're talking about what the earnout is and everything else, just understand that that's may never come to fruition.
You actually were in a deal where that happened, right? Where they kept prolonging the exit.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. That's true too. Yes. Yes. I have that still. I mean, one of the deals I was in was, one of the private equities, like they were going to exit right before COVID and then took the deal off the table and then I got done. So like that money, I can't access, there's no, these aren't liquid investments. So I can't, it's worth 0 until it's worth something. But in the case of the earnout, it might just be worth, 0.
Wow. So as you were going through this, did you have any like deal fatigue, or did you get irritated and frustrated and just tired of dealing with it? Like it's kind of this limbo situation, right? It's almost like I'm waiting for my wife to go in labor. Like, when's the baby coming?
Yeah, no, definitely. It is a lot. It's because you pick everything apart and feel like every question that's asked, it's like the guys on the other side, it's like a negotiation for ongoing. They want to find ways to get a better price. So they want to lower. That's why I said, for whether it's accounting or your Amazon accounts, if you have other brands running through the same account versus keeping them in separate accounts, if you have like things you're not selling off as part of the deal, but they're not in a separate entity, then, the other side is going to use that against you. Like, yeah, well, that's going to cost us, a couple $100,000. So we need to do that. So you want to do all of that before, you want to take off as many things off the table for them to negotiate against you through the process, because it does wear you down. And, we had been through it a little bit before too. So it wasn't a deal killer for us, but, and helping other people through it. And it absolutely can exhaust people to the point that they're like, what was supposed to be an exciting moment that the wire is going to hit, they're just like, screw it. I'm so freaking done with this process,
Whatever.
Yeah. No, yeah. There's a lot of emotion to it, right? There's a lot of just, it can be exhausting. Yeah.
So you said it's like it could be emotional. I know most people think like they're just riding on the rainbow and then they land at the pot of gold. Is that the way it actually works? Because I mean, you've been through multiple exits at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely does not go like that in most cases. Sometimes there's kind of like, perfect businesses, and it's like, I learned over time, I learned this from a private equity guy, is the best person to sell your business to, which this was in our case, but is someone that has to have your business. Like they need your business. That is like the pot of the gold, the end of the rainbow, where like, a competitor or someone, they need it, because then it's like those deals can go, I'm sure they can still be contentious, but they go, tend to go really well and the valuation is crazy, but that's rare, right? It tends to be more of a give and take through the process, and depending on what the type of buyer and everything. So with that in mind, it's it definitely can be emotional. It depends kind of how you approach business. And I think part of like going back with the military, background for myself, and which is like, you try not to get overly emotional in business and decision making, or as things get, the more pressure comes, the more calm you try to be. And I'm not always that way, because I can definitely get frustrated and pissed off and have those moments. But in the kind of the heart of doing business and bigger deals, and you try to kind of try to be calm, cool, and collective as much as possible. But yeah, without that, it can definitely be frustrating, and you can have those emotional moments. But when it comes to actual negotiation, we don't want to let that show across the other side too. Can we try to, it is a bit of a game of poker to some extent.
I don't know. Sometimes I think people show it on the other side, and while they're playing their little game, they're like, well, these guys might walk away. We might want to actually get our act together and come to the table.
Yeah. It's like, well, that is a version of poker too. It's just like, I mean, depends what you're willing, like I said, with any kind of negotiation, what you're willing to walk away from. In some ways, the power of negotiation is usually, they say, the party that needs the deal the least wins. Right. So it's like the more you can act or see, like, some case they're like, well, if they're not believing you, if the buyers aren't believing, well, your store, they're like, well, no, we think, COVID gave you guys a big growth, blah, blah, blah. We don't think that's going to happen. You might be like, well, you might have a good point. Maybe we should just keep the business and we're just going to run it and grow it. And they're like, no, we don't, so you can kind of play that both sides. But there, you are in a stronger point with any kind of negotiation, if you don't have to do the deal, right? So if it's like, yeah, we could keep running it. So we're interested, here's the reason we're interested. Whereas if you have to exit the deal, just like if you have no choice, but your home's going to become foreclosed upon, then you don't have, leverage in the deal. So yeah, the more you can have it, the more, and that's why a professional, representing you is good, because they're going to get you more buyer options, because they call it the book. They put together your business in a book with all the details and the work, and it goes out to them. So that way, if you're working with one partner to buy, or one potential buyer, and that falls through, and is that going to crush your life? If so, then, that's risky as well, to to try to pull that off.
Got it. So we found that people have existential crises after selling. I don't know if you had one, or if some of the other people that you've helped exit have had them, but that's usually signaled by, what was this all for? Is this really it? Or what now? Do you find that to be something that's common when people exit?
Yeah, it's like, I agree with that. It's common. I have like a little different experience on my end, but it is common to the extent, going back to, I think, what you said at the beginning, which is, if people have a perspective, and it's so common that, and it's understandably like human, that you think, only if I had that, if I had that big payday, if I have that, that's going to then, that's going to finally make me happy and solve my problems, or it's going to change my life, and I'm going to live life with a different level of happiness than what I had before. So that is definitely true. I've seen that with people, like they think it with, I've helped a lot of people exit brands too. So they think, yeah, they're going to go, travel with their family for the next few years. And then they realize, like, of course, we think about like professional athletes, because they're tend to be young when they're retiring. And so there's two aspects of it. One is, it's just mentally, emotionally, it's, maybe not all it's cracked up to be, or they don't experience it. And then two is just the reality financially. Um, that sure you had a payday, but there's always, bigger paydays and there's people doing more. And so it's all like, there's always a bigger element. Like, oh, you had a few $1 million or X millions. That's great. There's people doing $100 million billion. Like, so, and then there's also what's your lifestyle. So if you increase your lifestyle, like what do you need to maintain that and everything else? So I do think there's kind of several things that could be working against you. You got to be careful of mentally, just realistically, financially, if you go out and spend a bunch of money. And so, my case has been a little different just because I was doing some deals beforehand or doing a deal. I used to enjoy like, I kind of know already that I enjoy working. Like I enjoy building. I enjoy like, we're at the mastermind. Like to me, that is fun. And so it's just as fun to me doing that as it is, I'll go on vacations and stuff, but to me, I enjoy the process and building. And so from that perspective, I did kind of, it helped because I already knew, maybe because my family, my dad was an attorney, like he's 82, 3. He just finally like kind of worked his whole life. So I never really had a mindset of, oh, I'm trying to get to a certain point and not work. I view it more as, I want to be successful financially, but I want to keep, uh, playing the game, so to speak, because I do kind of enjoy it and see how good I can get at it and keep going. So I think that helped me a little bit, not kind of have this dramatic shift, whether it's from the private equity deals or this deal or the next one.
So there was no kind of, I don't know, champions remorse, because I mean, a lot of times when athletes hold up the trophy, they're like, now what, right?
Yeah, I have experienced that a little bit at times, but I've known it for a little while. So I feel like even before this last deal with the private equity ones and kind of realizing some of that, because it's funny, I had that even not financially, but just from like a position standpoint. Like I always dreamed of becoming a CEO of like a company. Like, and I say like dreamed, like in my mind, it was like an ambitious goal I had because it was like reaching the top and I did that. And I was like, man, I'm a CEO, I've got this board. And then I realized like, oh, I don't really give a crap about that. Like that doesn't really mean anything. Matter of fact, these are the reasons I don't like it. And so yeah, I've been through that a little bit in the deal, and I've been around enough people, and whether it's, so you say now masterminds, but just enough people that have been through this. I've kind of seen that story enough that, and I've seen people do it well. Why it's like people that have made, a lot bigger sums than I have that get at it, and why they keep, going after the next thing. And I think, we're kind of wired that way mentally that, hey, we want to keep growing and building. And it's, it's like, we want to be in the game. Like we want to figure this stuff out and be part of it. And so, I want to do a bigger deal the next time or figure out how to keep growing. So yeah, that's for me. It wasn't, I didn't have a huge drop off, but I was definitely aware of it. And I've seen it with, plenty of people out there. It is kind of a bit of a, messes with your mind a little bit. So you've got to be careful. And again, sometimes just financially, you've got to be careful too. Cause let's say, I know someone might have an exit for $4 million and they think, oh, that's like, I'm set. Well, then they realize, oh, taxes are this amount and your lifestyle, and maybe your spouse or whatever, you guys increase your lifestyle. And very quickly you realize like, oh, I'm right back to where I was, except I just have more expensive stuff.
It's funny you bring that up, because I think a lot of people who've created a business that cash flows realize like they turn off the cash flow. Now they've got this lump sum. And it's like, well, I knew how much my cash flow was. I don't know how long the lump sum will last.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
then they're trying to figure out, well, where can I put the cash flow, unless they're buying a new business, which most people I don't think are there, where they're going from I have a business to now I own a portfolio of businesses. You work with an investment company, so that's commonplace to have a portfolio.
Yep.
But that is the place that we ultimately think people should go. So do you just do investments in like operating businesses, or do you do stuff in like real estate or some of the other
Yeah.
things that
Done
people say
some
are passive?
real estate and rental properties, you've got, and then, some other, I've always had some investments like things like the stock market, and then some other of these deals too, which can be more, kind of riskier of like, kind of like angel investing, people that I know that, I've got buddies from their West Point classmates or guys that are going off and launching companies, and So, I'll see a lot of their kind of decks and proposals. So potential, some of those deals, we put money in, and where, there's not going to be, it's more of like, hey, it might 10x in 5 years, or, it might go to zero. So I've done some of that as well.
So we talked about brokers earlier, and then no, this didn't really impact you as much because you've been through the cycle. Um, is there or was there somebody to help maybe your other partners or some of the few people that you've helped exit with the I'll call it the transition? Because like you're a big deal when like you're running a company, and then when you're out or you're folded into the new company and you're not the guy or the gal anymore, like you're not as important. So like what you spend the energy on every day just kind of evaporates. Like who do they just figure it out on their own, or do they have somebody helping, or were you guiding them since you'd seen it?
It's an interesting point. Yeah, you bring it. We definitely didn't have anyone helping us around that. Um, and I don't bring this up to basically one of the partners passed away that we had too. So I didn't go into detail around that. So that was like a shocking deal. And it was, to the probably some of the mental complications of the business and the family and everything else was probably wore on him in ways that, didn't realize, or even aspects. So that was a big occurrence that happened with one of the partners passing away. The other partner, Jason, I mean, to your point, I think naturally what we do is we just put ourselves into other businesses. Because you're right, like there is this kind of, it's probably driven by ego a little bit, like, hey, you're running these bigger deals. And every person's different, but I'm like, I'd like to see that, like, hey, you try to be humble, and you don't need to be the center of attention. And I prefer not to be. So it's more about just finding the path of what's interesting. So like, hey, we're building a new company. We're building this. I've got a new partner, so that to me is interesting. It's totally different in some ways. Yeah. Cause you might be, a few person team, and you're doing that. But yeah, definitely didn't have any kind of help. I think both of us, just from our, Jason said, like from our corporate, it helps. And there's some people that are really young that do really well. And it's probably a little tougher because you haven't had as much lifelong experience. But I think for us, because it was a little bit of a longer path till we actually, had the bigger business later on. So, but yeah, it's an interesting perspective. I mean, it does come up to you sometimes when you're like running something and you got to like do all these crazy details that you used to have a team for. And now it's just, there is nobody. So you just got to do, but you just got to do what it takes.
Humbling.
Yeah. It's all right. Which is good, which I think part of the deal for any of us, like, you think like we're at the masterminds and there's plenty of people with different big stories, but it's like, it just doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter what you like. It doesn't matter that Perry Belcher did something amazing 5 years ago. It's like, what is he doing right now? And so I think he understands that, or I know he understands that. So that's why like you're reinventing yourself, and and I do like the challenge of like learning and being relevant. You think of big investors like Mark Cuban and stuff like that. I think they say the same thing. It's like, they want to know that they can be relevant and be in the game, and try to compete and see how good we are to, like, with the next wave of things. Can we do it, or do we get, lucky one time, or are you actually good?
Yeah. The one hit wonder, the fluke.
Yep.
Is it really? And so a couple of more questions here. Do you think it would have been valuable to have somebody, maybe not for you guys because you're seasoned, but do you think it would be valuable for somebody who's going through their first or second exit, not focused on how can we extract more value from the deal, but are you going to be okay on the other side of this?
Yeah. I mean, it's no doubt. I mean, it's interesting. Yeah. You brought that up because it's something most people probably don't think about as much. You probably take it for granted. Right. And I think you're more of an expert. You are an expert in the space relative to me, but there is emotional tolls that people go through. Even, I mean, you see it, even when you see things like suicides out there of not necessarily
Yeah.
on exit, but just like, Robin Williams. You see people, you always think like, wait, that's so surprising that person that person's so successful. This person, that's like the last person I would think. So not to say it's at that scale, but I think that there's another thing, but it's just, it's more than people think, going around it. So I think it's interesting. I'd love to, you mind, what's your perspective around it? What you've seen? Cause I think you've got some expertise there, but I'd love even if, to learn a little
Yeah.
bit more while I'm listening. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and from my perspective, there's a ton of people, right? You talked about all the bankers and so on who can help you figure out how to get more money out of your deal, right? Even if it's delaying it, even if it's not taking salary, even if it's more inventory. And I've heard you make recommendations on creating a community, having email lists, and all this other stuff to make the company more valuable when they go to sell it instead of just doing the revenue from the brand. But there's a whole person on the other side of the company. And if you built it from zero or close to zero to it being a meaningful part of your identity, right? Because you do it every day, right?
Yep.
Then once that goes away, it's no different for me than a divorce or a death, right? And
Yeah.
like it's like I got so much from this. And what I found is like with our private clients is like if we don't have somewhere else to place that energy because
Mhm.
you're so talented, you're so good at it, right? It's concentrated, it's like a laser, and it's going in and you're doing whatever you need to do with it. And then it just gets fragmented and you create collateral damage as a result of it. And so you see a lot of high risk behavior, you see relationships getting blown up. And I could keep going down the list of all these different things that end up being collateral damage as a result of the person not having a place to put that energy. And I don't think you find the place by walking on the trail in the woods or traveling across Europe or backpacking through Thailand. I think there's a deliberate process that you need to take so that when you get to where you're going, you actually have a plan. And even if the plan isn't accurate, you're directionally correct.
Yep.
There's so many people who build things because they pay well and not because it's truly a passion for them. And now you won the lottery. You should be able to do what you want to do. And I
Mhm.
think the only true success is fulfillment. Like so many people are chasing financial freedom, but fulfillment is the real F that I think they should be chasing. At least that's what
Yeah.
I see them
Yep.
actually find peace on. And so when they get there, it's like, oh man, well, what do I do now? And so now they got to go figure out how to find fulfillment. And that is an honest conversation. Like it is a conversation that requires vulnerability that most people are uncomfortable digging into.
Yeah. I'd say 100%, right? Cause it's like, that's the business side. It's gonna be personal, family, emotional. That's the real conversation, right? Yeah. So there's no doubt. And it can be so different at different times for people too. Right. So it's yeah, I definitely think it's a big, a big kind of potential void or risk that can happen. And so, for each of us are different. For me, as like, at least, try to keep myself busy. I've got 3 boys getting ready to go off to college, and the wife, the bills are big enough that it keeps me motivated to keep going at additional things too. So we're not kicking back. So, it's and trying to make them understand the value of businesses, because it's like, or of you always want better for your kids than you had, but you want them, you don't want things to be given to them, and you want them to have the right work ethic and tools, so it doesn't screw them up, the fact that you've had some success.
The so you're I know you said your dad was an engineer and an attorney.
Mhm.
I think, but for you, I think you're still the first generation wealth creator. Like he like laid the foundation and then
Sure.
you took it to that new level of um I'll call it grandiose, even though I suspect you don't live a grandiose lifestyle, but like
Mhm.
this is bigger than life. I couldn't see this when I was a kid type thing.
Yeah, that's accurate, right? That's true too, because even though, like, and grew up in Syracuse, New York, and he was like a good, small city attorney, did well, pretty well in his space, but it wasn't, um, like you said, it's just different levels of perspective, and even the world was different then. But like we've said this before, like our business, this Amazon FBA model, and there's other businesses that can do this stuff. We'd walk around our warehouse, go, man, there's no other business in 7 years that we could have built to like a global business and have this kind of scale. It didn't exist when I was growing up. And there's just some uniqueness of the time that those opportunities exist right now too. So that's just part of it, I think, for anyone. About it's like we're in a different world now than most of us grew up. It doesn't make it easy to execute it or make it happen, but there's just opportunities that it just wasn't part of the mindset, earlier in life.
And so when you get one of those FBA businesses to 9 figures, does the multiple change? Because like I hear them trading at like 3 or 4. Does it go up when you get to 9 digits?
Definitely it goes up a lot. So there's not that many at that level. So basically, let's say 8 figures. If you're so $10 million or up, you're going to start getting a different multiple. And I mean, when all the money came in a couple of years ago from these aggregators, one of them, Thrasio, they raised over $1 billion, and there was this run to invest because these guys were buying these businesses at 4x multiples, and they're being valued at the aggregators at like 13 times money. So it was like an arbitrage. So investors are just giving more money because they're saying at these levels, at this size of a business, we're at double-digit multiples, but we can buy these things at 4x multiples if they can run the business and actually grow them, which they kind of assumed was a given, but some of them found out, it's not so easy to run these businesses. So then the math does not work if
If it goes down.
if it goes out, which is what happened to a lot of them the last year or two. So all suddenly they've changed some of the approach, but yeah, to your point, that's really the point. So at like a bigger thing, you can definitely have double-digit multiples. Certainly, if you're at 10, part of the reason is someone, the buyers, if an investor wants to, like a private equity or an aggregator, if they could buy a $20 million business brand versus, 10 $2 million brands, they'd much rather buy the one because all the due diligence, all the legal costs, everything, you just kill it, one shot, one kill, right? Versus having to go through 20 of these different things. So it's going to make it, more attractive in more cases. The bigger the business is, the bigger the revenue is, you can command a bigger multiple. You also bring in different investors into the space too, because, if you're a $3 million brand, private, that's too small for private equity. So they're not going to be interested, but you get to a certain level, you're going to have private equity, you're going to have big national brands that are interested. You're going to have strategic buyers. So you just have, more players that would be interested in that, in that level.
Got it. And so is that multiple on EBITDA or is that multiple on top line? Because
mostly in the Amazon, mostly it's on EBITDA. Yeah, the multiple I'm talking about is just EBITDA. And most of the time they're discussed, it's based off the bottom line. It's kind of this balance of like the margins right now. Typically the last couple of years, like in the Amazon space, simply been like, hey, if your margins that are 15% or higher, you're pretty sellable as long as the top line that there's growth going on. If 20% or higher is like definitely attractive, but if you're right now, even last year, some of the bigger guys, they've been pulling back that they're not like a year ago, 15%, they definitely would be attracted now. Most of them are looking for 20% growth or 20% margins, and also nice top line growth as well.
Wow. Okay. So who's helping you with the next phase of life? I know you're in a mastermind. Do you have coaches? Like, help people understand like what it takes to play the game at this level.
Yeah. And I think this is one of the things you kind of get from the masterminds is so I'm in the Amazon space. I'm, pretty well known, e-commerce, if I go to Amazon events, it's great. I may speak at the events. It's kind of like, I'm a big fish in that pond, right? If I go to, which is fine, it's good, but I don't personally benefit as much from being at those spaces. It may be good for our business, depending what our product is. So that's why, thing like the driven aspect is great. That's why there's like a Wednesday call, and I try to like always be on the call. And, I do have a role to help people in e-commerce as part of that mastermind, but I'm like, I want to give, not just take, but I'm like, I view it as like it's a real opportunity to, I love listening and learning from people from other spaces and seeing what they're doing. That's why something like that mastermind, there's some others out there as well too, is really interesting and valuable to me because, I got into the Amazon space, e-com space. One of the strengths I thought I had and my partners had is that we could bring this outside experience to the space and then apply it to this Amazon world. Similarly, it's kind of how I view things like the mastermind. And it's not easy to connect with people like that unless you get into a room occasionally with people like that. I love taking that like total outside perspective. Like, Jerome, what you do is like totally different than anything I do. So, and some of the other people in the room. So it's like, oh, this is interesting. And let's see where something makes sense or tools are applying, like the things that are talked about in those rooms. I know within the Amazon space or econ space, like very few people are doing that. And so that's why I plug in. And I find it like, it's like people that really like to read books. I mean, I find it really like mentally stimulating and to go through those things and then try to apply it to our own business.
Got it. So do you recommend masterminds and coaching for folks who are playing the game?
Oh, 100%, 100%. So what I find is, the most successful people I know in the space they all, are investing in themselves. And part of it is you got to get in the room with the people. You got to get access to the people to keep getting around it and get inspired to a different level. So yeah, highly recommend.
I was reading your LinkedIn like about section, and you say something along the lines of anybody could say they're expert, but we actually do this. And you might have put numbers in there at some point as well. You teach people how to sell on Amazon. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about like what that program looks like? So if people are interested, they can plug in with you?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. It's funny. LinkedIn, I was like, oh, what do I have up in my LinkedIn? It's probably been a while since I looked at it. But yeah, no, so it was funny. We were running our big business, as we talked about through the podcast. And around 2017, we saw like all these people like online talking about selling on Amazon. And we were like, who are these guys? Because we know most of the players in the space. And then we realized, it's just the nature of the online world. There's a lot of like really good online marketers that put stuff out there and it's hard to differentiate. We're like, we actually know this stuff. We have a big team. So we started doing it in 2017. It's also been great just in terms of not just about ourselves, but developing really good relationships with other top people in the industry. So we go to these events, we'll provide. So we've been coaching, consulting, and in some cases looking to potentially buy people's brands for the last 5 years. We've helped over 1,000 people in the space. And myself, I've partnered Joey Roberts, and she had a $1 million 7-figure exit with her brand. So yeah, we're just like, we're really hands-on. We're like, hey, we're the real deal. And we also tap in, we collaborate with all the other top people in the industry. So it's not about that, that we're the gurus on the mountain. It's about like, and I would say like, you should find people that you like and you trust, that you resonate with. And so that's, that's different for everybody. But, for those that resonate with kind of our approach, we're not, we're kind of straightforward and kind of really help like people do the work that's taken. The people that fit that, they can help out. But yeah, I'm happy to share any information around that. I did this on the David Shands when I had me on. It's the only other time I did. I actually gave my cell number for people to text me if they're like serious and interested. And people thought it was crazy, but it was fun. We had like some really good people that came aboard. So I'm happy to share that as well if people want to do that.
Wow, that's generous of you. Okay. The final question, one that I have to ask because I think great people know great people. So who else should we have on this show? Who else do you know that's had an 8-figure exit plus that could come on and talk honestly and vulnerably about that process so that we can help more people be prepared as they go on that journey?
Yeah, I'll give you a couple, and I'm just going to also, just so it's on the recording, I'll read off the cell phone number. You can put it in the notes as well too. I just ask, people text me. I don't really pick up calls anyways, unless but my cell number is 404-275-8643. And if you just text me that, hey, you heard me on the podcast. Again, people that are serious, we love to help out. And so we'll connect and have a conversation to help people build and exit their brand. So, but in that spirit, so that's the simplest way. I'm on Instagram, everything else. Feel free to look me up there as well too. But yeah, so some top people. There's a guy, my buddy David Cups has exited 5 brands and now I think for $14 million. So they've done really well. I've helped him out along the way a few times. I know some guys like I think I don't know, kind of where that guy Manny Coates exited Helium 10 is big software in the Amazon space. So he did a really big exit. The firm I helped with, it's public knowledge. So we actually represented part of that exit. And now he kept equity. So he's part of the next deal too. And that one's gone really well. So yeah, I definitely know a few people. I can put some more thought around some of the other people I've known that have exited and see if I can send them your way.
Man, that would be awesome.
Mhm.
Jamie, this has been a great show, man. Thank you so much. It's really interesting to see kind of the opposite ends of the spectrum. When we talk to a person who did their first exit, like it's like, oh man, I wasn't prepared for it. And you're like a seasoned war veteran. You've been through it, you've seen it, you know what to expect. You can help guide people and make sure that they're in a good place. And so I'm sure you definitely understand the transactional side. The softer side, I stay more concerned about the more we talk about, and you brought up Robin Williams, which is a tragedy. That pressure to perform just becomes crushing at times. So I really appreciate you coming in and giving us this perspective, man. It was great.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, Jerome. It's I love what you're doing with the podcast here. So thanks for having me.
For sure. To the listeners, if you want the sort of help with your 8-figure exit that Jamie agrees would be helpful or would have loved to have, then we'd love to spend some time chatting with you. So get in touch with us and we will make sure that that exit is not a nightmare. You don't get stuck with the founder's exit paradox. Until the next time, your dream should be real.